Australia is obviously a big agricultural country. We're producing millions of tonnes of product and also billions of tonnes of agricultural residues. So these are usually waste residues that perhaps will be left on land or burnt just to get rid of them. And so what we're proposing is that these residues can actually be upgraded into a range of liquid fuels that can be fed back to the farmers in the form of renewable diesel to operate their machinery, or renewable diesel for their remote power, and even power some of our aviation sector to move us all around the country. I think there's some work to be done in educating on just what we're sitting on in terms of an opportunity. All of our farmers have assets that are going to be around for a very long time, and although maybe a shift to electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will make sense at a certain point, they're going to be sitting on these tractors for decades to come. So how can we ensure that the fuels that they're using here are actually renewable and reduce the carbon intensity of the products that they're producing? Because at the end of the day, when we start to judge how carbon intensive a lot of our farming is, it does come down to how our tractors are run, how that produce is moved to a port. And so these fuels can offer a range of benefits beyond just decarbonising the sector. As a lot of farmers will know, moving agricultural residues around is quite difficult. They're quite light, they're not very dense, and so it's going to be pretty difficult to ship these around the country in an economic way. You're going to have hundreds and hundreds of trucks moving straw around to make into fuel. So what we are kind of proposing is more of a hub and spoke model, where perhaps what we call local densification, where instead of transporting the residues, you upgrade it into an intermediate such as ethanol. And so a way to do that is called through a process called advanced fermentation, where you might have one of these fermenters within the community that everyone brings their residues to, and that gets converted using microbiology into ethanol, which then can be shipped around the country a lot easier and turned into different fuels. What we're seeing overseas and what's worked for other countries is a combination of mandates and incentives. So Europe is going down more the stick pathway with mandates, especially for sustainable aviation fuel, and that's giving the encouragement that farmers and feedstock producers have, that their products will be sought after in the long term. What we're seeing in places like the US is more of an incentive model, so subsidising the production of these fuels, which again gives that assurance to farmers and feedstock producers that there will be customers for their product. So what Australia does is going to be up to the Australian Parliament, and we just encourage them to look at what is being done overseas and what might work in the Australian context for Australian taxpayers and farmers.
We see it a few different ways. First of all, we think it opens up a new market for farmers. We can move into having renewable fuel as a good viable demand source for farmers, and importantly we think that can also be Australian based. We think that gives the farming community a risk management angle against offshore policies, and also we think secondly it starts to reward those really good farmers who are great on CI. As I said in the presentation, Australia is a harsh climate, our farmers are world class, and by having a SAF and renewable diesel industry in Australia, those farmers can start to get rewarded for CI the same way as they get rewarded for quality now. And then I think the final thing is extending outside of the farming community. It's those regions and towns around the farms that can also benefit from this. So we see job opportunities as well in that space. So a lot of what we see the opportunity being is initially in the canola space. We know that a lot of Australia's canola seed is exported to Europe to be turned into renewable fuel. We see a wonderful opportunity for first stage processing here in Australia. That turns it into oil. The meal is a valuable animal nutrition product. Again, that's something that GrainCorp operates and handles. So farming capabilities there. We need to invest in first stage crush. We think that's important. And we think also, if we look at the aviation sector, the default number for Corsair for canola is much higher than what we know Australian farm practices are. So again, we see a great opportunity for farmers to be rewarded for CI, and as an industry, try to bring that CI down. We see it being food and fuel. I think we're maturing in the debate on those two things. I think Australia is self-sufficient in food, and we have a role to play in in exporting and meeting the food demands globally. But we see that being balanced against what Australia's fuel requirements are. It was interesting to hear from the Defence Department yesterday and some of their objectives. And also, if we want to decarbonise, we need to start to put some of the feedstocks that are currently being exported back into the Australian system. And again, we see a good opportunity for canola, but also extending into the novel crop space. How do we start to find crops that can be grown on marginal land and also start to extend the balance sheet so that we've got more feedstock available? First of all, we'd like to see an independent party like the CSIRO come up with what that Australian life cycle analysis looks like. That will make sure that we have independent verifiable data that will help Australia and Australian farmers to start to be able to monetise some of the opportunities. Secondly, I think some sort of signal from the government on demand both for SAF and renewable diesel, and we think those things will be important to get the industry up and running. There's learnings both out of the EU and the US about how these policies can evolve, so I think Australia can take a bit of a hybrid of the best of those two.
Well, so there was a fair bit of talking about sugarcane and the sugarcane industry. That's a well-developed industry in Australia. So with sugarcane, sugarcane is actually quite high in biomass, and half of that biomass is readily available sugars. So if you wanted to, and sugarcane is also quite low in protein. So if you wanted to convert sugarcane into sugarcane ethanol, that would be the ideal feedstock. And then you could also produce protein from the waste streams from sugarcane ethanol production, such as your bagasse that could be hydrolyzed, and then you could produce high quality protein, as well as ethanol from the glucose that comes off that. And then with your vinasse waste stream, you could also convert that into high quality single cell protein that you can then sell as animal feed. I think the industry needs to collaborate. There needs to be a larger degree of collaboration between all the domestic players, and then we can also look towards international examples of how things have been done successfully. Well, personally, the science of it is quite close to my heart. I'm pretty passionate about science and all the breakthroughs and just the innovation that's happening on a daily basis on Australian soil and the potential that has for the future.